So good afternoon, and I want to add my very warm welcome. I am delighted that you are here and delighted that UVA is hosting CHCI's annual meeting. As has been mentioned, as a longtime member of the organization, board member for life, and former president, I'm particularly pleased that we have the opportunity to host you. And I just want to express my very special thanks to Debjani and all of her team for bringing us together. It's an enormous amount of work, and we just cannot thank you enough. Sarah and Debjani have already provided a broad and articulate overview of the theme of this year's conference, and I can't possibly improve on what they've said or on what we'll be hearing from our speakers and discussing together over the next several days. And I don't want to subtract from the time devoted to the opening lecture that Achille Mbembe is about to deliver. So let me say that thing that you hate to hear a dean say, let me offer just a very few words. As much from my perspective as a dean as from my role as a member of CHCI and as, alas, as a former Humanities Institute director. The first thing to note is that the theme of this conference, Humanities Informatics, is not just another conference topic, but an agenda-setting topic, joining the themes that CHCI has taken up over the past several years on questions of improvisation, the public and the state, performance, number, and the Anthropocene, to name but a few, which have collectively defined a global vocabulary for interdisciplinary scholarship in the humanities, not just for these recent years, but over the past 3 decades of the history of CHCI. When you come to CHCI meetings once a year, or even if you double or triple that number of gatherings as a board member or as a convener of one of the consortium's collaborative research initiatives or global humanities institutes, it's easy to miss the importance of this body in its question, problem, and paradigm-setting role for research in the humanities and for a discourse on the humanities around the world. As a dean, looking to where the intellectual centers of gravity sit, that significance is highly visible. As I suspect another of our colleagues in this room, Mariette Westerman, would further attest, that significance is also evident from the perspective of the Mellon Foundation and from the perspective of the other key philanthropic and co-agenda setting humanities councils and foundations around the world. To put it in another simpler way, CHCI is what it tells itself it is. These gatherings are as important as we convince ourselves they are, both because of the intellectual rigor and intensity of the conversations that unfold over a sequence of days, whether in Charlottesville, Cape Town, London, Hong Kong, Madison, or Edinburgh, and because of the global diversity of academies, networks, situated knowledge practices, and institutional forms we collectively represent, and because of their magnifying distributive impact as each of us returns to our own home institutions at over 250 universities in over 30 countries, and embed and extend our discussions and debates into further exchange with all the networks at whose nodal points we sit. So the choice of a CHCI conference theme matters. That doesn't mean that we always frame things exactly right, or that we are necessarily the first to take up a question, but that taken up here, investigated here, from the multiple overlapping and divergent methodological, situational, and geopolitical perspectives we bring, it matters, and will matter beyond these next several days. That then is part of what I'd counsel we consider over the coming days. What kind of agenda are we setting, or advancing, or contesting, by having chosen informatics as the intellectual occasion of our gathering? Certainly, we have chosen a question that is timely, not only in relation to a broader technocultural and historical moment, but one that is deeply timely in relation to the moment we inhabit in the unfolding articulation of the interdisciplinary humanities and the impact of that evolving interdisciplinarity on the nature and form of the university. As I've heard Jim Chandler, one of our longstanding board members, explain on a number of occasions, the moment of intense interdisciplinary ferment that has characterized the humanities since the 1960s can be broken down into a series of broad stages. In a first stage, the boundary crossings leading to the new fields and new institutional forms, including the Humanities Center, that he identified in his 2009 critical inquiry essay, Doctrines, Disciplines, Discourses, Departments, tend to be between proximate disciplines, literature and history, philosophy and linguistics. In a following stage, what Jim calls the more distant disciplines have entered into exchange: neuroscience and the philosophy of mind, climate science and history. A third stage I believe we are now entering draws on the energies of the preceding moments, but adds a set of new characteristics. Interdisciplinary research, which was previously individual and monograph-focused, is increasingly collaborative, multimodal, drawing on print, sound, digital media, screen interfaces, data-saturated, and problem-oriented. I'll come back to that. A case in point would be the series of multi-institutional, Mellon-funded research initiatives on the environmental humanities and medical humanities that CHCI has sponsored over the past few years, drawing together collaborative research teams at 17 universities in 5 continents, together with a new round of also Mellon-supported global humanities initiatives that we just heard about. This, though, merely describes what is happening. The equally important question regards what is driving this most recent round of interdisciplinary experiment. Is it what Amanda Anderson, another of our board members, identified in her recent Clarendon lectures at Oxford as the grand challenges turn, increasingly dominating university life and university strategic planning? Well, yes, in a sense. However irksome or reductive it can feel from the purview of the humanities, the grand challenges concept isn't completely void of meaning. The future of the environment, the crisis of climate change, is a global grand challenge. But we know, nevertheless, that that framework is in many ways interpretively lacking and bureaucratically far too neat. What we might do instead is to reframe this question from another of Amanda's vantage points and suggest that what is really happening is that some fundamental questions demanding what she calls value clarification are emerging at wicked scales of complexity across the globe, and that the complexity of those questions are such that they can only be answered through a dense intermingling of proximate and distant disciplines, individual researchers and globally distributed research teams, monographs, hermeneutic method, information analysis, and multi-form textual, sonic, and visual investigation and critique. What kinds of questions? Among them, without doubt, these questions, which Debjani and the other organizers of this conference have put at the heart of our conversations over the next few days. Is new media technology making democratic politics impossible? What are the implications for the university of knowledge and information explosion unleashed by large corporations such as Google? How has social life been transformed by new media technologies? What transformations have emerged in art and performative cultures with the impact of interactive media technologies? Should we view the digital as a step change in the technologies of communication and in epistemology as the equivalent of the invention of the printing press? When algorithms make decisions, is there any room for discretion? How has our understanding of the human been transformed by advances in genetic engineering and artificial intelligence? To take up just that final question, what does it mean to speak of the human in the age of big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning? Minimally, as we know, it is to speak of a human which has become bioinformatically hybrid, not only because of our uninterrupted interface with digital media and the screen worlds we've wrapped around ourselves like an exterior cortical skin, but also, to take an example from one of Jim's more apparently distant disciplines, clinical medicine, because of the advances in genetics, genomics, precision medicine, and population medicine, which have transformed our bodies into so many wet labs and data banks for advanced, individualized clinical care and algorithmic decision-making. As the organizing questions for the conference make clear, that problem, the problem of the algorithm, or what we might think of as the emergence of algorithmic sovereignty, is a particularly acute element of the question of the human and the post-human, in the informatics age. It's not only that algorithms increasingly play the role of the Schmittian sovereign decider. As the aptly named Pandora musical platform indicates, they are also increasingly our box openers, picking our cultural and social boxes and opening them for us, guiding and directing our tastes and habits of consumption, steering us down one social media wormhole or another, and so influencing, shaping, and governing our digital discourse communities, the angles of awareness, perspective, and ideology we bring to our political lives, and to revert to Schmitt, the dispositions we bring to the friend-enemy distinctions he put at the heart of the political. If those friend-enemy distinctions ever more dramatically organize the arrangements of the digital and informational spheres, it is the purpose of this conference to investigate. Then, as Debjani has already mentioned, and as we witnessed so appallingly in Charlottesville this past August, they often also escape the sphere of digitally trafficked life and spill into the hard and vulnerable zones of embodied lives and embattled streets, where the long and enduring histories of race, dispossession, disenfranchisement, and white supremacy, these digital worlds fantasize, solicit, galvanize, and entertain, burst violently, intolerably into view. As has already been mentioned, the last time we were together as an organization was in Cape Town, last August, on the exact days of those events in Charlottesville. And it is necessary and crucial that this conference will end with a panel on that racist assault on the practice and idea of democracy that lie at the heart of the idea and the practice of the university. As we participate in that discussion 2 days from now, one of our core tasks, I believe, is not to see that panel as a part from the remainder of the conference, but as a necessarily culminating panel, informed by all our conversations between now and then, which means neither reducing the present life of racism and the present politics of violence to the digital, nor disregarding the viral powers of the digital, of new media, of the informatic, to metastasize the viruses of racism and violence long resident in our various bodies politic. And it means determining how we will respond to those poisons in our social life and asking what value clarification they demand. To launch us on those conversations, I can think of no one better than Achille Mbembe. He truly needs no introduction. His astonishing range of work, from the books he has written or edited, including On the Postcolony, Johannesburg, the Elusive Metropolis, and the Critique of Black Reason, to name but a few, to the collective research enterprises he has organized, including the Johannesburg Workshop in Theory and Criticism, the Johannesburg Salon, and the newly launched Decale Atelier des Pensées that we just heard about, to the awards he has won, including just this past year, the Gerda Henkel Prize and the Ernst Bloch Prize, are simultaneously well-known and escape any possible summary. So let me mention just a few touchstone elements of why Achille is so perfectly suited to this occasion. The first is a typically tour de force talk I heard him give at Cornell a few years ago, in which he surfaced the idea that we are entering a new animist age, by which I understand him to have meant not only the animism of the new materialisms articulated in one way or another by the scholarship of Jane Bennett, Bruno Latour, and Timothy Morton, among others, the post-human animism of actants, vibrant matter, and hyper-objects, but simultaneously the fetishistic animism of the digital, the animism of data, the fetishism of the screen and of the sleek handheld objects where our screens show us their magic faces. If the algorithm is one key to the age of informatics, then the animism of the algorithm, Achille's work has taught us, is another. A second touchstone is his widely read and highly influential work on necropolitics, work which seems more prescient and apposite and necessary to our moment with each passing year and day, work which has helped us understand the productions of enmity, the distribution of violence, and the reorganization of sovereignty in the twinned ages of the suicide bomber and drone warfare. Or to put it in the terms of this conference, the age of the actor and the algorithm, the corporeal and the visualized, the point of fact and the point of information. A third touchstone is a conversation over dinner last night with Achille and Jim on the intersections of our age of flowing networks and hardening borders, on the violent interdiction of migrant and refugee passages across Africa, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, Central America, and the US, and the extension of European and US and other border posts and turnback stations well beyond the formal border zone, on the new security strategies for biometrically coding, marking, and registering the refugees and migrants of our times to ensure that the border is something they will never successfully cross, but remains an unerasable mark, permanently, informatically, data tattooed on their bodies. If there is, as I'm inadequately trying to suggest, no one better suited than Achille to help us move toward a conversation on race, violence, enmity, networks, borders, sovereignty, politics, affect, and life in the era of informatics, then before I invite him to the podium, I want to mention just two final reasons to thank him in advance for being here. The first is for the work he has been pursuing and from which I believe he will be drawing, which remind us that all the dilemmas and transformations of this moment are not only global, but planetary in their range, that Africa is at the core of that planetarity, and that our moment is one that is not only biometrically, but planetarily disruptive of our concepts of the human and our reimagination of the possibilities of political life ahead. And the second is, because within all the complexity of his thought and work, Achille also personifies and lives one of the great joys of the human and the post-human. The joy that is the opposite of hate, the joy that is the opposite of enmity, the joy that is the opposite of the hate of borders, the joy of friendship. If you know Achille, if you have the chance to spend more than 5 minutes with him, as our children learned the first day he met them, and stripped them down to their underwear and threw them into the pool of his house and leapt in after them, if you know Achille for more than 5 minutes, you will know him immediately as a friend, a vibrant, animated friend, an unfailingly loyal and unbordered friend. And it is, to conclude this overlong hybrid welcome and introduction as a friend, that Achille is also here. Not just as a friend to many of us, but as a friend of our beloved friend, Srinivas Aravamudan, the brilliant scholar, past president of this organization, and equally vibrant, borderless friend, in whose name this lecture is given and in whose memory we are gathered. It gives me great delight to introduce, avec bise, mon ami, Achille Mbembe, who will be launching our conversations as he delivers, as no one else can, the Srinivas Aravamudan Memorial Lecture. Achille.
Okay, I think I have to be careful. I shouldn't lean on this in case, as you can see, it takes me to Jonathan. I would like to thank the Dean, my great friend Ian, and to thank Debjani, both of whom are generously hosting all of us in this prestigious institution. They themselves are committed to transforming, and which is so privileged, I think, to count them in its staff. Frankly, I would have preferred to listen to them since they already launched the conversation. They both have a very special way of making us feel at home, and as far as I'm concerned, I intend to fully enjoy that hospitality. I would also like to thank Madame la Présidente, Sarah Gaillard, and with her the board of CHCI, and all the friends who are in that board, Premesh, Jim, Gary, and many others. I would also like to recognize in the room our very dear colleague, Ranji, who is sitting right here. She didn't come with Nachiketa, but we'll see Nachiketa soon somewhere else. I would like to tell Ranji that Srinivas left us not so long ago, and that he did, and it was too early. He was the kind of human being, as Ian intimated, kind of human being many of us thought would always be there. And therefore, there was no hurry. We could take our time, almost leisurely. And then in an instant, he was gone. I first met Srinivas through Tropicopolitans, his chef d'oeuvre in 3 parts, in which he uses the notion of virtualization not to talk about new media technologies, but to reread the legend of Orunoko, the depiction of accounting and piracy in the fall, the neo-Stoicist discourse in Addison and Swift, a book in which he then goes on to examine in the second part the function and of what he calls Levantinization in Montague's Letters from the Levant, as well as the phantasm of Oriental despotism in Burke's philosophical inquiry into the sublime and the beautiful, before addressing in the third part a form of tropicalization known as nationalization, which he says belongs to the empire rights back variety. What is at stake in this work, as well as in subsequent texts by Srinivas, is not simply a conflation of humanity and literacy. Jan referred to humanity, the humanities, so did Debjani. What is at stake in this work, as well as in subsequent texts, is also what constituted the kind of literacy that could bestow humanity on others, as literacy per se was no guarantee for membership to the human family as defined by European colonial discourse. The book is, this one as well as the others, are notable not only for their archival strengths, for the skill and sophistication with which it brings postcolonial thinking into the landscape of 18th century scholarship. It also notable for its combination of textual detail and critical reflexiveness. Srinivas' eagle eye on paradox and irony, as well as his deep interest for the simultaneously utopian dystopian promise or potential of text and acts. I say all of this, could wrap it up in one sentence. I think I have never met someone who was so capable of teaching me what it means to read and to write. He truly believed that to read is to set out on an adventure, that to write was to challenge, even to baffle the reader, calling him or her to enter wholeheartedly into the serious pursuit of thinking. And I think that for all of this, he will always be with us. Now, tonight, I would like to revisit in a very open-ended way what Heidegger called the question concerning technology. As you may remember, Heidegger was concerned about technology in at least two ways. First of all, he was concerned about technology in terms of what he called its essence, or more precisely, its double essence. That is, technology as an instrumentum, the Latin term, a means to an end, and technology as an anthropology, that is simply as an activity performed by humans, an activity that sets humans apart from other species. So that's the first sense in which he was concerned with technology. There was a second sense in which Heidegger was concerned about technology. Technology as, in and of itself, and I quote him, a way of thinking. That what is technology? It is a way of thinking. Or to use another one of his formulations, I quote again, a mode of revealing. Technology, in fact, as a certain kind of presence. I'm still in the Heideggerian vocabulary. Presence in a specific kind of realm, the realm where unconcealment takes place. The realm where, I quote again, truth happens. So technology as an event of truth. So he was concerned about technology as a way of thinking. What kind of thinking? A kind of thinking that prepares, and I quote, a free relationship to it, it meaning technology. So the question of the essence of technology was of concern for him because he was convinced that the relationship to technology should be one of freedom, a means to freedom, the end point of freedom, the conflation of means and end in the production of the event of truth. To experience a technological within its own bounds, he thought, was the only way to open our human existence to its very essence, which is truth and freedom. So such stipulations may seem pretty metaphysical or even theological. I would say a secularized theology of technology, which it seems to me borrows a lot from St. John's Gospel. A gospel, as some of you know, which is articulated around a precept. Truth will set you free. Maybe this is the reason why Heidegger felt the need to further clarify what he meant. Indeed, what are we talking about when we invoke terms such as the essence of technology, or when we refer to others, such as to experience the technological within its own bounds, or when we suggest that the technological is the event through which truth and freedom come into being and manifest themselves as the ultimate being and the ultimate dwelling of the human. So what do we mean by all of that? This is Heidegger's response. A long quotation, you will forgive me. The essence of technology is by no means anything technological. I think we could agree with that. Were it so, technology would be just tautological. And he goes on, we shall never experience our relationship with the essence of technology so long as we merely conceive and push forward the technological, put up with it, or evade it. Everywhere we remain unfree and chained to technology, whether we passionately affirm or deny it. But we are delivered over to it in the worst possible way when we regard it as something neutral. For this conception of it, to which today we particularly like to do homage, makes us utterly blind to the essence of technology. End of quotation. Now, freedom is the ground from which the question concerning technology must therefore be posed. Interestingly enough, Heidegger assimilates freedom with something he calls the open. What is the open? The open is a space where we are neither confined, quoting him again, to a stultified compulsion to push on blindly with technology, or what comes to the same, to rebel helplessly against it and curse it as the work of the devil. Okay, I'll stop quoting Heidegger there, so relax. You have had enough of him. We'll move on. Now, Heidegger's insistence to approach the technological from the vantage point of freedom in terms of disclosure and concealing, in terms of opening and in terms of dwelling, this insistence, in fact, characterizes a long tradition in the West when it comes to the relation between humans and artifacts or technical objects. It is important to remember all the above because we inherit a tradition, including a tradition of thought. Let's call it, just for the sake of, let's call it Western metaphysics. It has three features. First, it is a tradition which, to start with, assumes that there is a division between the technical world of human, and the natural world of the non-human animals, forgetting thereby that the widespread use of tools among animals, nowadays at least, is indisputable. Second, it is a tradition predicated on an active myth. The myth is that the Earth's technosphere was brought into being by a particular kind of animal, the human, an animal, the human, in possession of a large cognitive capacity, one whose development of language and culture had already liberated it from a purely instinctive relationship with its environment. A relationship one could still witness or observe at work in what Lévi-Brühl called the primitive mind among those original humans who still lived under the rule of animism. Third, the same tradition holds that all the tools, machines, technological artifacts, and devices with which the humans interact are there to serve, either to fulfill, two key functions, either to replace human action or to respond to human expression or sensation. Finally, it is a tradition that harbors at its core two kinds of anxieties, which we have carried with us until now. We're still carrying those anxieties whenever we hear the term technology. The first is a deep anxiety about the relations between people on the one hand and things on the other. About the relations humans entertain with objects in general and technical objects in particular. It is a tradition that strives on the deeply held belief that people invent things, but people are not things. It is deeply anxious that there might come a time when the reverse happens, when things take the place of people and people are treated as things. And the whole idea of alienation or emancipation rests precisely on that. People are not things. And therefore, they should not be treated as such. Which in itself raises all kinds of questions. I mean, what if, let's say, you treat your cell phone better than me. You take care of it. I mean, it's develop amazing intimacy with your cell phone or your computer. And I find myself in a position where, if you ask me, I would really be treated like your cell phone rather than as a human, which is not speculation. That we live in a world where some people dream about being treated as things because they would be better treated than as humans. Paradox. But let's go back to that tradition, which it seems to me is haunted by questions such as how much of the human activity should technical objects replace? And since much of the human activity takes shape through the human body, how much of that body should they replace? To what extent should technical objects be made at the image of the human and of that very body? Should we, like Thomas Edison during his times, provide the phonograph with a voice chamber modeled on the human mouth, complete with teeth and tongue? Or should we, like Friedrich von Knaus, between 1753 and 1760, create typewriters looking like androids and capable of embodying or capable of reproducing the entire human body with hands and arms like a living writer? These were serious questions asked in those times. Such haunting questions have not been left behind. They keep lurking behind every single latest so-called turn, be it new materialism or, for that matter, object-oriented ontology, which is nowadays colonizing fields such as anthropology and others. I'm being now very provocative, you understand. So in a sense, at least in these straw man I have constructed with your help, the Western tradition, we have achieved an almost unparalleled intimacy with machines and technical objects. And yet, the deeper this intimacy has become, the more we have nurtured a constant obsession, the obsession to keep the borders between the human and that which he or she creates, keep those borders properly policed. Our contemporary intimacy with machines has also exacerbated this anxiety, and it has made identifying the point where machines should end and bodies begin more difficult than ever. Now, I must say that this anxiety has never been universal. In African pre-colonial worlds and systems of thought, for instance, the impossibility of ever fixing such a boundary was universally recognized. It was also generally recognized that there will always be some degree of overlap, even reversibility, between the human, his or her body, and the objects he or she invented. It was furthermore generally recognized that agency was shared between these different entities, and this co-agency was itself a key element in the nurturing of all kinds of vital forces. Finally, it was recognized that agency was tied to flows, not just to humans or to singular events. This was common sense. And this is what was dismissed as animism. In other words, what was dismissed as animism was the recognition not only of the principle of co or shared agency, Latour would say redistributed agency, but in African pre-colonial systems of thought, it was shared agency, co-agency. So this, what is was dismissed. Also dismissed was the recognition, as I have said, of the principle of overlap and reversibility of bodies and things and objects. And overlap and reversibility, which did not essentialize the body, did not naturalize its modes of sensation and action, but spoke to a different way of accounting for the way we sense and act with objects, without objects, the many ways in which the body is not just one more object interacting with other objects, and the technologies that surround it. So that's the first kind of deep anxiety that has been there, which we are still carrying with us, and which, from a Heideggerian point of view, prevents us from, let's say, understanding the quote-unquote essence of technology, which is about the political questions of freedom and truth. But there is a second type of deep anxiety which haunts this tradition and which manifests itself not in the form of a dismissal of quote-unquote animism, but in the form of nostalgia for a time when we could manipulate the environment directly. So, paradox of dismissal of animism, and yet longing for animism, maybe under another name, still with the same forms. According to this narrative, we have moved from that time to another time when we could manipulate the environment directly. We have moved away from that to a stage when technological artifacts have become increasingly autonomous, and our originary self-sufficiency, capacity to directly manipulate the environment, all of that has been taken away from us by our machines. Underlying this nostalgia of a lost relationship with the natural is a characterization of artifacts as threatening to dehumanize or enslave us, turning us into extensions of or motors for the machines originally intended to serve us. It is the nostalgia, as I was suggesting, for a return to a time of spontaneous and direct relationship with the natural, and of course the modes of action and perception typical of that epoch. We find such a characterization in countless works in which the making of tools and their use are seen as exclusively and quintessentially human, a moment of rupture during which the human animal progressively liberates itself from the limitations of inherited physicality. And here I quote Le Roi Gourand, first by reshaping its body and then by moving into the realm of culture through language and techniques. A line of argument that goes from André Le Roi Gourand, which you find again in the works of the likes of Bernard Stiegler and a number of others. Same works reiterate the position between supposed opposition between the natural world of biology and the development of tools and technology as part of the myth of human exceptionalism. You find the same line of argument, including in Marx himself, who laments about the loss of an intimate relationship between worker and tool, a key part of industrialization's dehumanizing effects in a Grundrisse. Now, that was the first set of observations. I have one more and then I'll draw a conclusion. We might think that this way of posing the question of technology does not really account for our present, what I have just gone through. And yet, the argument I was making is that we are still in it. In fact, we're still in it, and yet new questions are in front of us. And I would now like to comment on these new questions. First of all, it is a fact that unprecedented numbers of human beings are today embedded in increasingly complex technostructures, as Debjani was making case in her short introduction a moment ago. They are embedded in these complex technostructures while significantly intervening in the dynamics of the Earth system on a planetary scale. As we all know, this has led to the transgression of planetary boundaries, such as those related to anthropogenic climate change, degenerative land use change, accelerated biodiversity loss, perturbation of the global biogeochemical cycles, in particular of nitrogen and phosphorus, and should add the creation and release of novel entities such as nanoparticles and genetically engineered organisms. It therefore makes sense to reframe the question of technology in the context of Earth system analysis. That's a key point I would like to add to the agenda-defining project Ian was referring to. So reframe the question of technology in the context of Earth system analysis, a field of research that explores possible development pathways compatible with the co-evolutionary dynamics of the geophysical and socio-techno spheres. So the point I'm making is that there is a need for a critique of technology, a post-Heideggerian critique of technology. A critique of our ways of acting and sensing, because that's also what technology is all about. It's not simply about ways of thinking. It's also about ways of acting and ways of sensing in the sense of the senses, if you want, the five senses. Acting and sensing with and through objects, especially objects of our own making. So a need for such a critique which should be located within this attempt at connecting separate discourses. Discourses about the technosphere on the one hand, and Earth system analysis on the other. That's the first point. Second, it is true that technologies are becoming more and more tied in, both metabolically and reproductively, tied in complex networks of extraction and predation, the political economy of technology. Extraction and predation, manufacturing and innovation. Take, for instance, what is going on in the domain of genes and molecules. The heyday of DNA study we currently live in has allowed, among many other things, the cracking and public dissemination of the genetic codes of almost anything, of humans, of plants, of animals in particular. This, in turn, has given way to an exponential rise of something called biological, I think it's patents. That's the English pronunciation, patents. In French, it is patent. And we go straight to it, patent. In English, patents. Some of you may know that currently nearly 20% of the human genome is now privately owned. In a context of a market logic that addresses life as a commodity to be manipulated and replicated under the volatility of market consumption. For instance, in the food industry, the last century helped produce 80,000 new molecules that were subsequently released into the ecosystem and whose behavior we cannot fully predict. In the process, a handful of multinationals have jumped into the chain of the food industry and patented seeds, chemical herbicides, GMOs, and pesticides, products which we know intervene directly in cultivation methods and enhance crop production rates, while, of course, devastating the soils and making people's homes uninhabitable. It's a question of an inhabitability which precludes all the considerations, Heideggerian considerations on dwelling, which are in contradiction with the project of dwelling, the project of freedom and truth as the possibility to dwell somewhere. It is therefore correct to argue that there is a shifting distribution of powers between the human and the technological, in the sense that technologies are moving towards general intelligence and self-replication. In other words, they don't need us any longer. We need them more than they need us, because they can replicate themselves. They can design themselves. In other words, we are no longer the creators we used to be. And that is true. And that is only dramatizing the two deep anxieties we spoke about, which we carry from earlier modes of critique of the technological. So current developments do not assuage those anxieties. They deepen those anxieties. And in the process, they create a context in which, in the minds of some, in any case, technology and eschatology are merging. Or technology and the apocalyptic. The apocalyptic taken to its terminus, which is the possibility of human extinction. The end of the history of humans, which doesn't mean the end of history as such, because there will be a history beyond the humans. Because in any case, the history of the humans is a footnote in the broader history with capital H. So all of that is correct. To use a South African term, South African politicians like to use the term correct. It's correct that, it's correct this. So we use it here. It is correct what I'm saying. The other thing which is correct, and I'll stop using that term, I promise, is that with the positivist predominance of statistical forms of knowledge, both Debjani and Jan referred to this question of knowledge in this age. So the predominance of statistical forms of knowledge, data now provides the groundwork for a mode of governance that directly intervenes on the relation between information and matter. Over the last decades, we have been witnessing the development of algorithmic forms of intelligence growing in parallel with genetic research, and often in its alliance. The integration of algorithms and big data analysis in the biological sphere brings with it a greater belief in techno-positivism and modes of statistical thought, regimes of assessment of the natural world, modes of prediction and analysis that treat matter as a finite and computable object. That matter is, that's what it is. That in fact, that's the only thing it is. Concomitantly, algorithms inspired by the natural world and ideas of natural selection and evolution have been developed. Such is the case with the genetic algorithms designed to evolve and further adapt to the environment in a process of, once again, self-generation. For those who are not fully aware of this, genetic algorithms are a subset of evolutionary algorithms that mimic actions inspired in biological operators, such as cells. They seek to optimize the responses to the problems of their environments by self-generating and encompassing processes of mutation and natural selection. All these things we thought belonged to the 19th century are back in force, indeed, in the technologies of the future. Questions of natural selection, natural evolution, and so forth and so on, we thought we left them behind, but in fact, they are now deeply embedded in the technologies of the future. And as made clear by Margarida Mendes in a very powerful piece called Molecular Colonialism, the translation and mirroring of natural processes is assumed to be inherently good. The assumption is that this mimicry is good. It is often accompanied by the belief that everything is potentially computable and therefore predictable. That computation and predictability, prediction, collapsed in one and the same moment. In the process, what is rejected is the fact that life itself is an open system, non-linear, and exponentially chaotic. That is what life is all about. It's exponentially chaotic. It is an open system, it is non-linear. And in view of the observation I have just made, one understands why contemporary concerns about the technological singularity are increasingly linked to, as I said, eschatological or even apocalyptic concerns. Most of these having to do with what looks like an impending human obsolescence or extinction in light of evolutionary biology. So to some extent, we are therefore somewhat far away from Heidegger and his preoccupations with metaphysical questions of truth and freedom. The post-Heideggerian critique of technology seems to squarely address the present and future of technological civilizations, no longer through the lens of truth and the metaphysics of freedom, but via the lens of life and intelligence, and from a planetary vantage point. I think that's where we have to go. That's the direction I think we should pursue. Life and intelligence, in terms of how they emerge, the conditions of their evolution, in terms of how they can be sustained, and under what conditions they end. Overall, these new debates have put forward new ways of looking at technology, ways which treat technology along with human beings and their institutions as part of an emergent component of the Earth system, which has been given the name of technosphere. A sphere which, it is suggested, is a crucial feature of the new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. I won't go into what lies behind the concept of the technosphere we don't have time for that. Let me quickly make some remarks about algorithmic reason, since Debjani put it in the title of the talk, and I have to use this opportunity to to say that I didn't give the title. She made it up. It's a fake title. But since she did it, I have to take responsibility. I'm trying to work with algorithmic reason, and I will say one or two words about algorithmic reason. And here I draw from the work of Matteo Pasquinelli. Pasquinelli defines algorithmic reason as a form of rationality that is about the understanding of vast amounts of data according, I quote him, to a specific vector. In other words, it is a specific computational procedure. A computational procedure whose finality is to record emerging properties, record them, and to forecast tendencies based on large data sets. That's what algorithmic reason is all about, in any case, according to Matteo. Now, those who have paid attention to such procedures of computation agree on at least one thing: they are pretty repetitive and robotic. They generally operate along two epistemic poles of functions: pattern recognition and anomaly detection. This is what algorithms do, or part of what the work they do. The two epistemic poles, pattern recognition and anomaly detection, are key features of what is now known as algorithmic governance. And an expected anomaly can be detected only, of course, against the background of pattern regularity. Recognition of whom, of what? Recognition first of an enemy. If you want, it's in the DNA of the algorithm. The enemy is in its DNA, the search for the recognition of the enemy. Just as I was arguing earlier on that in the DNA of some of these technologies are 19th century categories of natural selection, so forth and so on, in the DNA of algorithms is the figure of the enemy. Schmidt and the others, of course. Enemy recognition, which locates algorithmic reason firmly in the realm of warfare, military affairs, geopolitics, drones, and forensics. I can go on and on. You understand what I mean? Now, what kind of enemy? In fact, two kinds of enemies besides the usual categorization. First, the internal enemy of society. The internal enemy in the tradition of biopolitical studies initiated by Foucault. Then the enemy, and here now I'm relying on Matteo again, the enemy from the point of view, quote him, of labor exploitation. I think, yes, of course, but I think Matteo could have gone a bit further. The enemy in terms of not only the worker who is exploited, but a whole class of populations, and I use the term populations à dessein, huge class of populations we believe we have nothing to do with. We do not want to enter in any relationship with them. A whole class of populations that are, if you want, superfluous, in the sense Hannah Arendt used that term. a whole class of populations that are, at first sight, inexploitable, non-exploitable, because they do not enter in any calculus of exploitation. You do not need them. And therefore, what do you do with them? What do you do with people you think do not belong, are not useful? What do you do with them? And that has been an element in the history of biopolitics I believe Foucault didn't really attend to, blind as he was in relation to formations of slavery and colonialism. But, and blind as he was about racial formations of the racial. I could go on and on this. Let me bring this to an end, an abrupt end. Let me bring it to an end by making a few telegraphic statements. First, the fact that today the opposition between knowledge and image, thinking and seeing, appears to collapse, not because all images are digitized, that is turned into data, because that is part of what digitization is about, the turning of almost everything into data, into a code, which is then redistributed, which circulates and allows for all kinds of interventions. Not necessarily because of that, but because computational and algorithmic logic is found at the very source of general perception, the question of the systems of perception. Call it the DNA, the foundation, the ground zero of the real. That's where they are located nowadays. So, if power now is about seeing patterns or connections in random and at times meaningless data, if that is the case, which it seems to be, at least partly, if indeed algorithmic governance is about a paranoid recognition and arbitrary recognition of patterns on a planetary scale, what do we do with the bias that is part of the DNA of algorithms? How do we create the conditions in which calculation becomes a site of political struggle? I think we do that by imagining different modes of seeing and measuring, partly. That's one way to do it. Different modes of seeing and measuring. In view precisely of the fact that technologies of calculation do not simply present an improved perspective on the world, they present different worlds. They allow for the formulation of different problems. So, contra an epistemic hegemony that has reduced the earth to a computational problem, matter to a computational problem, life itself to a computational problem, different modes of measuring, calculating, will open up the possibility of different aesthetics, reformulation of the politics of inhabiting the earth and of sharing the planet. Because at the end of the day, That is what technology should be all about. It should be all about, and here, call me neo-Heideggerian if you want, technology at the end of the day should be about how we inhabit the earth and how we share it. Sharing the earth, sharing the planet, as a precondition for its sustainability. Thank you very much.
Achille, thank you very much for that incredibly elegant, continuing to raising the questioning concerning technology, which I think you came back to very, very forcibly at the end by returning to actually Heidegger's appeal for the attentiveness of poiesis to a certain extent. And in that regard, I would just like to frame the question, and this might be, I don't know how this is working, but a statement. In Heidegger's addendum to that essay on technology, The Age of the World Picture, he returns very, very forcibly to these questions, and there he lays the responsibility, the weight of the responsibility for raising this question on the back of the university. And it's in that essay where he attributes the onus of the same political mechanism that you so elaborately articulate very, very much on the development already in 1954 of the research agenda of the university, at the expense, he says, of erudition. So I was just interested in hearing that, the unfolding of the university within this discourse.
Shall we take the couple?
We'll take all of them and then one go.
I think that's good. Yes.
Oh, back there.
What's his name?
Go now? Okay. You were speaking about this anxieties in Heidegger, and one could think that both anxieties or nostalgias, and the other that you described, were in a way presuppose a certain realism. I mean, it's easier to recognize in the second, where you see this kind of direct, unmediated relation to nature. Also, the idea that subject and object are not correlative, that they could be fixed in the place in the first anxiety. So if you take a different point of view, a critical point of view, in which you ask instead of the reality, the essence of the subject or the essence of nature, and you think of the conditional possibilities of the representation of the way they are, you could think that technology starts much earlier in the ways you were saying that it starts when we sense in a certain way, so in perception. And the great question there is, what is the figurative principle that allows a certain synthesis? And I'm going to just put three things and I finish. Is you could think that technology starts much earlier in the sense that the ways that we conceptualize, a concept is a technology, is a way of producing reality in a certain way. And so you could think that these sort of things are, in old times you had analogy, which is a way of finding similarity and difference. Then you had montage. There was a big revolution in technology where you would fragment and juxtapose, and it produced these events, which explains in a way the cult of the event in contemporary philosophy. And now you have algorithms, and that's where I want to get. What would be the principle of synthesis of algorithms? You had spoken about repetition, you had spoken about this kind of self-capacity to replicate, but it's not clear to me what will be the principle of synthesis of algorithm that changes completely the way we are representing reality compared to montage or to analogy that had dominated in previous times. Thank you.
So we'll take one more response, and then Achille will respond. Okay, Gary, and I'll come. Two more.
Achille, thank you so much. I'm interested in also in the place that you alluded to a couple of times, but where your critique of Heidegger did not begin, and that is in a dismantling of the human, non-human animal dichotomy that stands at the heart of Heidegger's humanism, but precisely in the question of technology, as we now know so much better, and as Uxkol knew already in Heidegger's time, doesn't hold up. How do we reconceive, in other words, our sharing that you spoke of at the very end, once we have taken apart the notion that human exceptionalism is partly marked by technology?
And a final question from Simon.
A non-Heideggerian question. You ended with an appeal that I find very sympathetic for a different form of measurement. I wonder if you could say what you might mean by that, and to say whether you think that is a form of non-numerical measurement on which the algorithm is based. Non-numerical measurement.
I just wondered if you could speak to a specific case study, just to ground this in sort of your traditions of a race theorist, and think about the patent issue and thingification in Henrietta Lacks, for example. So on one hand, sort of the truth that bodies should not be owned is complicated by the fact that inequality is produced by the patent. So when we patent body byproducts, there's a way in which that means that there's less freedom for medical research and producing more pharmaceutical or pharmacogenomics that could heal people, right? So on one hand, we say this is an injury to Henrietta Lacks because her body circulates, but there's a way which can be counterintuitive to us as sort of race theorists in thinking about the ways in which thingification can actually be the conditions for freedom. So I'm just sort of curious about that, as given the sort of framing of like Heidegger to the patent, how you might operationalize this framework.
Thank you. Okay, over to you.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the questions, and obviously, in the little amount of time we have, I won't be able to address each of them in depth. I would just maybe like to make a kind of rejoinder. Look, the key point, one of the key points I was trying to put on the table has to do with the overwhelming fact that the rule of reason, which was, let me just put it like that, our project, at least since the 18th century, that project is being re-articulated by put it quickly, instrumental rationality. It is being re-articulated by instrumental rationality into a procedural processing of information. In a sense, reason has reached its limits. In a sense, what we are witnessing is a process of corruption of reason. Algorithms and other computational procedures, if we were to make big claims, are part of that process of corruption of reason. Part of that process by which knowledge as such disappears in favor of information. Information is not knowledge. Information is information, knowledge is something else. But part of what is going on is that information is taking the place of knowledge and pretending to be knowledge. So as this is going on, the instrument for reasoning itself acquires a new function. And we have to think about what these new functions are all about. Time itself becomes enveloped in the doing of machines. Maybe that's not new, but it has escalated. Those who work on algo trading have a sense of what I'm talking about, where time is calculated in nanoseconds, where the distinction between instant, time, and moment has completely vanished. And the indifference to any specific context or even content has become the norm. So, this being the case, the question, there are many different questions that arise. This being the case, how is it at all possible to reimagine a different modality of relation to perception, to the real? Is it possible to make sure that what we used to call subjectivity doesn't remain forced to move and exist within data granularity? These are some of the questions I was trying to ask. I cannot pretend that I have an answer to them. But it seems to me that if we are to renew the project of freedom, Jan was talking about democracy, of truth, in this age, we will have to attempt at least to formulate those questions in the most radical way possible. I'm not sure that I did it, but I hope that this will be the opening for that kind of inquiry for our CHCI. Thank you.
Thank you.